All right, we are ready, and you are here. Now we're ready. See, we were waiting for you to show up, Mr. or Mrs. Listener, or Ms. Listener. Anyway, this is the Podcast Engineering Show, and this is session number 24. Right, Barry?
Yeah, oh yeah.
That's it. He's here with me, 24. Let's do it. See, I can't make grunting a habit on this show because the Profit First podcast that I co-host, when we start, it's like 30 seconds of everyone grunting and saying, it's crazy. Anyway, welcome to this show. This is the Podcast Engineering Show. I'm Chris Curran. I produce podcasts for Forbes and Dun & Bradstreet, as well as many business authors and companies. And each week on this show, we bring you podcast production techniques on a silver platter. We really talk shop about the audio engineering side of podcasting. The whole production value, sound quality, that's what we talk about. This isn't a show about marketing or listeners or downloads. I mean, all that stuff is, arguably more important than the sound. But, of course, these days, the sound is really important. I have a background as an audio engineer in the music business, and since I entered podcasting about 4.5 years ago, I noticed a huge lack of audio skills in podcasting. And so that's what I bring to the table. That's what I can help people with, and I love it. So that's what this show is all about. I started this show to support the school. I'm starting a podcast engineering school. We're going to have workshops and courses about how to really, make things sound better. EQ, compression, mastering, all these kinds of things. And we have great guests on this show. That's one thing. And some guests are like, experts or audio engineers or, people with a lot of experience or whatever. And other guests, like the last episode, just a regular guy. He's just doing it. And I think it's valuable to sort of go through what folks like that are doing as well. But this episode, we have someone who's much more technical, and this is going to be awesome. I'm totally psyched for this. But again, this show's brought to you by Podcast Engineering School. Go to the website, podcastengineeringschool.com. Soon, I've been saying for a while now that the fall of 2016, we're going to start. And we really are, because I had my little pilot workshop here in Colorado Springs like last weekend, and I learned a lot. So now I know what I'm going to do, what I'm going to offer, and it's going to be exciting. And also my production company is Fractal Recording, if you want to go to fractalrecording.com. Podcast production of the highest quality. Of course, this show you can listen everywhere. All right, that's enough intro. My guest today, Barry, that's enough intro, right? See, this is what happens. Barry, I can blame this on Barry. Barry, turn your fader up, please. Barry, you're enough intro, right?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Okay. What do you think about the end of that intro?
There's no activity, no giggle, no nothing.
Oh, yeah. That's enough. That's when you know. So Alan Mead. Let that sink in for a second. He's a dentist and a podcaster, and he hosts the Dental Hacks podcast, and he has a Focusrite Saffire. So now, who can say that in podcasting? Alan, welcome to the show, man.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Yeah, this is great. So we're going to go through the speed round and do all that kind of stuff, but we met because you were listening to the show, I think, right?
I was. It's true.
There you go.
I was listening to the show. So how did everything go last weekend? I really want to know. You've been saying for multiple shows that you are going to have the dry run. And did everything work out as you hoped, or are you going to have to do a major revamp?
Well, I already debriefed it, and I already made decisions on what I'm going to do. So that's
Cool.
that's pretty much the reason I did it, to do it, to feel it, and to see what I'm going to do. But it went okay. Actually, here's one thing that happened. It was supposed to be, it was an in-person, hands-on workshop. So I literally had everyone bring laptops and load some software and open up some sound clips. And then I actually had a piece of hardware. I had this little PreSonus channel strip, which is kind of a cheap item, but hey, it's a channel strip. It has an EQ and a compressor in it with all the knobs. That was the point. I wanted people to twist knobs. Mm-hmm. Here's the thing, though. 3 hours I planned. It went I literally finished all the theory in 3 hours, and we did zero hands-on. And
interesting.
Yeah, it was terrible, because that's what I wanted. And even one of the participants was like, well, if you're going to charge a lot of money for this, there should be some more value. And I was like, yeah, but we didn't even do the hands-on. Like, if you did the hands-on, then it means something to you. That's the whole point.
Yeah.
But it did go well. I was I was happy about it, and everyone loved it. The whole theory part and the whole getting into the not only the fundamentals but more advanced details of EQ and compression. It's great to understand. So you probably know a lot about that. Did you study audio anywhere?
No, not at all.
Right at home?
No, I didn't at all. I studied how much I hated using Ecamm call recorder. Actually, I didn't hate using it. I hated when I had 4 or 5 people on a call and someone's Skype like burped or whatever, and I couldn't fix it because I had 2 tracks, myself and everyone else, and that's where I learned to do something else. So
Right.
I have no training in this whatsoever.
I'm totally psyched to get into this with you because I know you're a guy who has many computers set up so you can connect with people separately and record them on separate tracks. Like I said, you have a Focusrite Saffire. We're going to get into that, which, by the way, is an audio interface similar to the one I have. I have the Focusrite 18i20 Scarlet, and you have a Sapphire. So they're basically 2 different lines.
Yeah, they're the different levels. Is Scarlet USB or is Scarlet? I can't remember. There's also
It's USB, yeah.
Okay. There's also a new one that's also a red color. Claret.
Oh,
Claret. There's a Claret now too. Yeah.
Right, I saw that. Yeah, they have really great stuff, but
They do. They have cool stuff. Here's the thing. I like their stuff because I'm very intimidated by physical mixers. I have a Behringer mixer that is in a bag somewhere that I tried using. I just couldn't figure it out. Yeah, I just couldn't figure it out. I was not patient enough with it.
So
I
wait,
got a lot of.
how do you get like 4 computers into the Sapphire? You just put them directly in?
I do. Actually, I have 4 computers, and they're little PCs. They're not heavy duty hitters, and all I do is run Skype on them. So I have the cool thing about these, and I can find the model for you, but I think they're discontinued. There's an input and an output. So there's a mic output or a mic input and a headphone output. Right. So I basically run the headphone output into a DBX 286S. And then I take the DBX 286S and I put it directly into the Focusrite, into one of the Focusrite channels in the back here. I have a Pro 40, so I have 8 line inputs, I'm counting them right now. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's something like that. It's 8 or 10.
Right.
Inputs. Basically XLR inputs or line inputs. So I put them in as a line input. And then I run that. I record directly on my computer. I have an iMac here. I record directly on my computer. And then I run a mix minus out on the output channels that goes back directly into the little mini computers. So I essentially am connecting with one person at a time. I have up to 4 lines, so it can be myself and 4 other people. And our show routinely has at least 3 people on it. So it's myself and a co-host, and then we oftentimes will interview one person. But then we also have a segment we call the Brain Trust that we routinely have myself and 4 other people doing a roundtable. Oh, okay. And so, we've used the heck out of the system. It works really well. What I found is, first off, recording multiple channels or multiple tracks at a time in one place is really great, because if one person has an issue, you can edit it out super easily. I mean, and that happens all the time, right? I mean, that was the reason it drove me crazy. You couldn't have really great. It can be distracting from the content when you have dumb sound things. You know,
dogs barking. Yeah.
Well, exactly. And you never know what your guests are going to have. You never know what kind of gear they're going to have. I will say, right now I'm speaking into a USB. I had a glitch before we started for whatever reason. This wonderful setup that I'm talking about, I can't get to work with your software.
With Cast, which is so strange, because if you have a computer set up that normally works with Skype, you're coming out of the headphone port and you're coming back in through the mic in port, the little 1/8" mini ports, right? Why would it not work with Cast?
Well, you know what,
it's so
though?
Weird.
You know what, though? I have to select the sound. I have to select it as the audio. I probably need to set up what happens with these Focusrite units is they're completely software driven. So you have to tell the software what your inputs are and what your outputs are and all that stuff. Probably I haven't set it up, so that's all right. I haven't set it up in such a way.
So that's what I was going to ask you. How do you do a mix minus when you don't use a mixer? It's because you use the mixer, like the Saffire Pro.
Exactly. They have this each. So the Sapphire, line uses a piece of software called Mix Control.
Oh, boy.
And honestly, if you look at it, it looks like a mixer.
Right.
So why am I so afraid of mixers? I'm not exactly sure.
Right.
Because it looks just like a mixer.
Right.
But what's cool is you have multiple channels, and I have 4 mix minuses going out of this thing. That's the other thing too. You realize when you start doing roundtables, when you buy a mixer or an audio interface, you gotta know if it's got enough channels that you can go out on.
Yeah.
Like that's the thing. Like you're sort of limited by the number of not just the input channels, but the output channels. Anyhow, so I do the mix minus in this software instead of doing it on a mixer.
That is cool. Yeah, that's true. The mixer, like I know a lot of guys, including Cliff Ravenscraft, he recommends a mixer that has 2 aux sends, yep. I think. So you can send 2 different mix minuses, basically. Mm-hmm. So I do a very similar thing as you. I have many computers set up so I can have many different people connect and record them all separately. But I do run it through a mixer. It's a Mackie 1642. It has 4 aux sends, which is cool, but it also has some routing. It has like buses 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. So I actually use auxes 1 through 4 as mix minuses, and I use bus 3 as another mix minus. So I got 5. I'm capable of doing 5 mix minuses off the board, which is handy. I mean, when you're going to record everything on separate tracks, that you need that, obviously.
Definitely.
So let's step back. Let me tell us, where is your studio? In your home?
Yeah, it's in my basement. It's literally in the corner of the basement, and I'm surrounded by old carpet remnants and old comforters. It is as unprofessional as looking as it could possibly be. I would send a photo, but I'm actually embarrassed. So
I was thinking, you're a dentist. I wonder if you went with like a dentist motif with like a chair. Imagine a dentist chair with a mic hanging over it.
Yeah, there you go. Now you're talking.
With a little light on it. Open your mouth.
I have a small studio. So because we sometimes will record during the middle of the day, so I have a setup in my office, and I actually have one of those. I have a Focusrite Claret there, and got stuck. Realized it's only got 4 inputs or whatever, but realized that I can actually only record with one person there because I don't have an extra computer sitting in there. But I have a little studio at the office, so we can do that during the day. Occasionally, my co-host and I will record kind of a live to tape thing that people are really digging to. We did this because like the different kinds of formats, interview as well as roundtable, seem to really, people like both. Honestly, I think sometimes straight interview shows can get a little boring, or maybe formulaic. Not necessarily boring, because it really depends on who. If you got a great guest, it's fine.
Right.
But it's a little formulaic. So we like to mix it up a little bit. And I feel like my favorite podcasts are roundtables. I swear, I think they're the best.
Right.
That's a personal opinion, but I the very first or one of the first podcasts I started listening to is called the Skeptic's Guide to the Universe. They're pretty big in the science. They win a lot of podcast awards in the science stuff, and they have basically 5 people every week just talking about science stuff. And so that's kind of how I learned about podcasts. So when I first heard them, that's what I thought they were. They were roundtables, and that's not really true.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, I know. Well, we both know Ray Ortega. He has the Podcasters Roundtable, and he's going to be on this show soon. I mean, it's summertime right now, so he I think he's on vacation. Good for him. And he also asked me to be on the Podcasters Roundtable at some point, which I'm psyched to do that. But here's the thing I want to ask you about roundtables real quick. If everyone on the roundtable is in a different location, I know from experience that a lot of time people must step on each other and talk over each other. So how do you handle that?
Poorly.
I don't think there's any magic bullet to handle it, right?
The solution would be video, right? I haven't figured the video thing out. And a lot of guests that use Skype, if they've never been on a round table, they think, oh yeah, there'll be video. And Skype allows you to do that. However, you still only get the one track then. So the realistic thing would be figure out a way to do video with everyone. I don't know. Maybe you run a separate... I'm not exactly sure how I could do it. I'm sure there are brains out there thinking, oh, you should do it this way.
Right.
But video, I will say, gives you the visual cue of when someone's going to say something. But the reality is the ability to edit the tracks can make it so it doesn't feel like people are stepping over each other. Typically you can fix that.
Right. So do you do that? You go in after, like if there's a big intersection where everyone's stepping on each other, and then you actually go in and delete people who get stepped on.
You kind of cover it up. You try and keep the conversation going in the line that it was, kind of thing. Sometimes you're not sure who you got to delete. It doesn't happen that often, surprisingly.
Right.
And it depends on if the people that are on that particular roundtable have been on multiple times or not, because you kind of get used to how it works.
Right. Yeah, I do the same thing. Like when I'm recording, I write down timestamps of everything I hear that might need an edit later, and I always write down ST for step on, and then I go back and I'll just remove the person who isn't necessary in the conversation, because sometimes people will go like this, so that like they'll start to say something and then someone will just go, and then so just taking out that little it just makes the whole thing flow.
It smooths
smoother.
everything out. But the thing is, that's the thing that used to drive me crazy when I used Ecamm was you couldn't take it out,
Yeah.
And I think to some extent it's not that big of a deal, but I was like, no, I want to do roundtables, and there's a lot of dental podcasts out there. There's not that many that are doing roundtables, and the ones that are all recording in one location. So they don't have to worry about they get the visual cues because they're all in the same room, So it's just I wanted to be able to do that. And honestly, I saw Dan Benjamin at the second podcast movement. I walked up to him. I said, Dan, you've cost me a lot of money. And he got a little nervous because I'm kind of a big guy and he's kind of a little guy. And I said, no. I built what you told everyone to build, how you do it. And so it's his fault that I have this set up, because I did exactly what he described back in. He's got a show called he doesn't put it out very often, like once every couple months. But it's the Podcast Method, which is a good show. But the best ones are the earlier episodes where he describes his setup really well. So I essentially did this, and it worked out really well for me. So,
oh, really? Oh, that's cool. I don't know.
It's
Dan.
good. He's got the 5x5 network is his. He's got a podcast network down, I think, in Austin, Texas. He was a good speaker at Podcast Movement too,
right?
And he's got good info for podcasters.
That's cool. I'm going to have to reach out, or maybe you can introduce me or something. I'd love to have him on this show.
Oh, he'd be awesome.
Yeah. So let's go through, like everyone knows, we usually start with a speed round. So the first question is, what are the shows that you produce yourself? And it's just the Dental Hacks podcast, right? Yeah,
the Dental Hacks podcast is the one that I do. For a short time, I did one. It's probably not even up anymore, because I think I canceled the hosting on it. It was called You Know the Drill, which was just for my office specifically. I think I put 3 episodes out there, but this is the only one that I produce now. However, I'd like to do, just like you were talking about with a couple other people a few weeks back, I'd like to do one that's more narrative, more storytelling too. So I may get into that as well.
Oh, I have plans to come up with this template. Like, instead of spending 40 hours or 190 hours like the NPR and the PRI folks do, I'm figuring out a template where I can interview someone for about an hour, let's say, and ask questions strategically, and then later on just chop it up and move it around. Like, not really, not crazy amount of editing, but chop it up, move it around, add a little narration, and and try to come up with a template that makes sense. And I don't know, maybe I'm dreaming, but anyway,
I haven't, like you said, I haven't tried it myself yet, so it may take more time than I'm willing to put in. To be honest, we'll see.
And it always seems like the NPR people who are narrating these things, I'm always surprised at how just calm they are. That, in fact, even the way I'm talking now is too energetic, because they're like,
you need less coffee before you start these. Apparently, they do sound. They're always very conversational, and they are always very low key. I agree.
Yeah, it's like this. Yeah, it's low key, and Alan is on the show, and I spoke to Alan. We got into the lightning round, and that's maybe I'm not doing it well.
It actually sounds quite a lot like it, and I like to listen to it, but I don't know if I'm capable of actually doing it. We'll see.
Right? Well, this will be fun. I know Dave Jackson recently did one.
Yeah, I heard his episode. I'm like, oh, Dave. And
really?
He's like, it just takes a really long time. I'm like, I was hoping that you weren't going to say that, but I kind of figured it would.
I didn't hear it yet. I want to hear it. I didn't hear it. I know he posted about it. All right, so the second question of the lightning round is overview, very briefly, your hardware and your workflow. So you're getting ready to do a podcast. Tell me what equipment you're using, the whole list.
Okay, so the mic that I typically use, I'm not using right now, but the mic I typically use is a Rode Broadcaster, and I have that hooked into the first input on my Focusrite Saffire Pro 40. I'm sorry, but that goes through a DBX 286 first, so I'm using those as my preamps, and then basically that goes into the first input on the Saffire Pro 40, and then I've got these 4 little Windows machines basically geared up in the same way. They go through they each have their own DBX 286S, and then they go into an input. And then I set it up. I'm using Audition to record. So I use Audition on my iMac. And that's what's really cool about this. It sounds really complicated, but really I only had to set it up once, right? I mean, like, I kind of record everything the same way. So once it's set up, it's not complicated. It was kind of complicated when you set it up.
Right.
But once it's set up, it's not complicated at all. And that's, if you invest the time early on, I do the same recording every time I record, right? I mean, it's like, so it's that part makes it really easy. So then I set up in Audition, I have a multi-track recording setup template, so if I'm recording multiple people, I just basically plug in who the people are and make their track live and roll. I will say that I'll do levels before we start. So I'll start recording and then I just do levels through I'll have them tell me this is an NPR thing. I have them tell me what they had for breakfast that morning. And then I just kind of tweak so the levels are not too high. I think I heard from you that it's just way better to record your levels lower than you think you need because it's much easier to bump them up than having it clip.
Yeah. I'm curious because on my Focusrite Scarlett 18920, I realized lately there's not a lot of headroom. So sometimes it happened when I was crushing the level. It was kind of going to 0 and going over 0. And I thought, most digital recorders, they have, in fact, my little Sony M10 has 12 dB of limit. You can go 12 dB over and it limits it down to 0 and you don't hear it. I mean, you kind of hear that it was limited a little, but it doesn't distort. But this 18920 actually got crunchy. It started distorting a little. So you kind of have to learn your audio interface. Like you got to push it a little and see how close you can get and see if it's forgiving or not, or somewhere in the middle.
I use, I know just literally the last episode of yours that I listened to, and I think it was the one that you were talking about, Podcast Movement. I do use a limiter on, I have a real mild setting in the DBX on all of them. So I basically am trying to make it, the whole garbage in, garbage out thing. I want my signal to be pretty clean and pretty good coming into Audition so I don't have to do much to it. And I really don't. I don't tweak the signal. Once I've recorded, if it sounds pretty good to me when I'm recording, I don't do a lot to it before when I'm editing. It's more about editing for content at that point. So that's why I like having the preamps to kind of compress and limit for sound anyhow. So that's what I do.
The 286S's are really good. By the way, the other thing you can, for sound check, the other thing you can have them talk about that I've found people love it actually is I say, tell me about your first car.
Oh, that's a great idea.
And people
because they'll go on about it.
Oh my God.
You can really tweak it in.
I have trouble shutting them up. It's like, all right, enough. I got the sound check.
That's a good point. I have only started doing that recently. I used to say, okay, say something brilliant. Well, you put them on the spot like that, and then they don't have anything to say.
Exactly.
So breakfast, even if they didn't have breakfast, they'll have something to say about it. So that's easy.
Totally. All right, so you're putting everything through the compressors and limiters into the Focusrite Sapphire, and you adjust the levels on the Sapphire itself. There's little levels for each input, right?
You can, yes, you can, and you can do it there. You can actually, honestly, I will tweak it on the DBX. The DBX is at the very end. They have an output gain. I will tweak it there a lot of times too. You could do either. They're literally. I have it on a big rack sitting on my desk right in front of me. It's kind of crazy because the other thing is each one of these computers. I don't have 4 monitors for these things. I have a little monitor switching box. So I have this little tiny monitor. There's a tiny monitor, then above it are the 5 DBXs, and above that is the Focusrite. So it's nice now. It used to be kind of on the ground. I had to mess around with it. I put it up on the desk, and now it's really nice. I can just look at everything.
That's cool.
So I'll sometimes tweak it right on the DBX when I'm doing the sound check,
Yeah, that's actually the way to go. So I don't know if you could zero out the Sapphire, and what I mean by zero out is something I did and something we always did in the studios, is that you use a 1K tone and you put a 1K tone through the board at 0 dB, and then you go to your recording device, which in our case is, well, you have the Sapphire, I have the Scarlett, and you adjust the input there so it reads 0. But of course, 0 dB on the board isn't 0.
Sure.
Like absolute 0. It's like, I actually set it to like -3 or something. But anyway, I set it on my Scarlett on the audio interface so that, I set the input volume on the Scarlett. In your case, you set the input volume on the Sapphire, and then you never touch that. You just adjust it through the DBX. That's cool.
I really try not to, the less messing with settings, because typically I'm getting a pretty similar signal, unless someone's got a really crap mic. Like, I have just a whole bunch of, I don't know if you remember last year when the ATR 2100, I think on Amazon, was for sale for like $30 or something like that.
Jeez.
I bought, and they limited the number you could buy. I bought like 6 of them, and my co-host bought like 6 of them. So we have like 15 of these mics, because we like to send them to guests when we can. Because honestly, if we're not sure what the guest is using, it's great to have. These are great mics that are pretty durable to be sent and stuff like that. So literally, I got these mics. I literally had one in a box that a guest had sent back to me to set up for you. They're just sitting here. They're good mics. Wow. They're workhorse mics, and when they have a decent mic setup, you don't have to do much. Now, occasionally you get someone who's doing using their laptop mic, which can be a mess. Not always, but it can be a mess.
Right.
So you have to play with it. But if I can avoid it, man, I try not to mess with it too much.
Totally. All right, so it's going through the Sapphire, and it's going into your iMac, and you're recording into Audition.
Mm-hmm. My Audition setup is super basic. It's just basically a 5-track template that I use.
Right.
And then I'll basically I record the whole thing when we get done, and then I edit. What's cool about that is I'll take that, I'll do a backup copy of it. I'll throw it on an external hard drive, just so I have a copy of the original somewhere else, and then I edit that copy right there when I'm doing my editing. So it's pretty sweet, because then all you do is you just run through it and you make sure everyone's. I mean, I'll take track by track, make sure it sounds okay. If I need to tweak the EQ slightly, I will, but I usually don't need to do very much, because we did a lot of work with getting it sounding good coming out of the DBX. So that's sort of what I do.
And that's interesting, because if all your guests are coming through Skype does its own little bit of processing, limiting is what I think they do. So it definitely less need to compress and limit a Skype voice afterwards. Usually, it depends actually though.
I've also found that Skype sounds much, much better having one individual connection. In other words, like we used to do it where we'd have multiple people all coming through one Skype connection. I think Skype must have to work harder to do that when you have multiple people on one call. So when you've got 4 separate Skype calls on 4 separate computers coming in, I definitely think the sound is better. Like I don't know if it's just that it doesn't have to do as much work or what, but it just sounds much better.
Right. By the way, backing up tracks, I do the same thing. As soon as I record all the basic tracks and the recording session's over, I immediately I have a Dropbox account, so I have 1 terabyte or something.
So do I.
Yeah, for was it $99 a year or something. And I have this folder. I just immediately just copy it into that folder, and it uploads it to this it's a temporary backup folder that I use. And then, of course, after I mix it and after I do everything, then I just delete it off that temporary folder, because I don't need it anymore. I have 2 external hard drives that I back up to as well, so everything is back.
You got to do it, because if you haven't, if you don't back it up, there will come a time where you're wishing like crazy that you had. It's only I had 1 file corrupt last year where I lost an entire interview because of it. That was a mess. So I've gotten much better about my backing up. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So then you do your editing. You said you don't process it much, but you do your editing right in Audition, right? Mm-hmm. Okay.
So I typically am editing. I basically just listen through at whatever the first notch up in speed is. So I was there, so I heard it before. But and then I'll slow down and tweak the take out the stuff. What's nice about it is you can go track by track. If one person's track is particularly noisy, you can process for that, or you can even just go through and silence whatever. And it just makes such a clean sounding recording when you've got multiple people on there. It makes a huge difference.
Right. And then you render it down to.
Okay, so I edit that multi-track. And what's cool is we have basically the format of the show is we have the co-hosts do, I call it an intro, a transition, and an outro. So it starts just Jason and I in the first part. Usually that's 10 to 12 minutes, something like that. Then we have the interview segment. Then we do a transition segment. Then we have a brain trust segment. And then we go to the outro. And then we have a couple little mini segments within the outro. But what's cool about it is I'll record interviews and then I'll record brain trusts whenever it's convenient for me. And then Jason and I typically record the Sunday night before we release, which is we release on Tuesday mornings typically. And so then I'll just go right through. As soon as Jason and I have recorded, I'll just cut those up into, and each time, once I'm done recording or editing the multitrack, I then render down to a WAV file. I don't know if I should do that or not, but it seems like that has always worked, which is a monster. They're monster files. They're huge.
Right.
And then when I've got all the waves kind of put together, I have a template, a show template that I'll just open up. And that's my favorite part of the whole process, because you just get to plug and chug what you've done your hard work on. Then you basically make it sound like a cohesive show. From the template. So it's been great. I'm a fan of Audition. I got to tell you, I want to try other things, but every time I try one, I'm like, Audition works great for me, so I don't have a big problem with it. Like I have Logic. I've demoed a bunch of them, and I can't get them I can't figure them out well enough to bother. So I typically fall back to Audition.
Yeah, well, Audition's a great program. I mean, I'm planning on trying it with my next production box.
Oh, and I use Illustrator and Photoshop enough that it makes sense for me to go ahead and do the $50 a month or whatever. Like I use enough of their software and now that I use Audition, I wouldn't want to give it up. So I just basically pay out the nose for it.
That's interesting. So like our previous guest, which you haven't heard that episode because it didn't publish yet, you take your raw tracks, you mix it down to WAV file. What resolution, by the way, WAV?
Man, let me see.
1644.1 regular 16-bit?
I think so. God, I should be able to tell you. I look at it all the time, but I don't.
Yeah, I mean,
I
it's
can't remember.
Not a big deal. And then so you take all the WAV files then, which is your main show, and then all these little segments are all in WAV files, and then you have a separate Audition template where you have your music and all your clips and pieces.
Exactly.
And then that's where you put together the final thing, which is awesome because you can drag things around and make the transitions, smooth. And then you render that into your final MP3.
Yep, that's exactly right.
Okay, cool.
That's exactly right. And actually, you know what I do? I take something I didn't. Oh shoot! I just did this. I was trying to see. I do exactly what you said with the. I'm literally rendering one as I speak.
Oh.
What I've found myself doing now with the 5 tracks or the 4 tracks of a conversation we've had recorded, I will throw each track into the match loudness settings before I even start editing, and I'll have them match like a 21 LUFS kind of loudness, which has really been kind of cool, actually. Because what happens is, no matter what you think you're doing with these DBXs, some people come through a little bit brighter, a little bit lower. Yeah. And so I will process that before I ever start editing, so I don't have to worry about it after the fact. It's kind of awesome.
Interesting. So you can tell a certain track in Audition, say, set this track at -21 LUFS.
Or you can just equalize the tracks so that they're all sitting at that. It's pretty sweet, actually. It's Audition seems pretty powerful considering.
Yeah.
I don't really know enough about sound engineering to know, but it's worked really well for me. And we get comments that the sound is really good and crisp and everything like that. So I think it's been really good.
Yeah, and putting each track at -21 LUFS makes sense because you would think, oh, why not put it to -19, which is the standard for mono, or of course -16 is the standard for stereo. But if you have multiple speakers, when they overlap or talk at the same time, or someone laughs while someone's talking, it adds up and it makes it louder. That's like on the old when I was mixing music and producing music. Is you think each instrument, the fader should be around 0, but it's not. It's lower because it all adds together. You have to make sure everything adds up so that the stereo mix is the right level and not clipping and not too low as well. That's pretty cool. So now your editing philosophy, let's talk about that. How nutty do you get?
Just
Barry,
like everyone who's starting. Oh, yep.
Yeah, hold on a second. Barry, you've edited a lot in the past. Have there been times when you got really nutty?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay. And Barry, what is someone going to need to really not go too nutty for editing? What does someone need?
You're going to need a couple of horses or a couple of mules.
We got
okay,
that.
Alan, go.
That. So when I started, it took me a long time to edit. Like if we had, we typically do about 30-minute interview, 30-minute brain trust, and then it ends up being a not quite 30 minutes of intros and outros and stuff. So it's a longer podcast, and it would typically take me, if it was an hour of podcast, it would take me probably 4 to 5 hours to edit all that stuff in the beginning. This is a couple years ago.
Right.
Now I can do it in less than, I'm probably lying if I say, it's probably 2 hours to edit the whole thing together now. So it's as much time to edit and stuff as it is to record. Probably it's not too awful bad.
That's great. Yeah, because you have all your systems set up and everything just boom.
Now, the
boom.
other thing is that when you can you're not having to make the big save when you can have multiple tracks and you just edit individual tracks to quiet them. You know what I'm saying? Versus going, how am I going to fix this? You know, when you've got everyone on one track and you have someone's Skype goes crazy or whatever. So yeah, it's definitely, I found editing is much more satisfying when you've got multiple tracks.
Yes. Oh, because you have more control, more power. I was doing my Star Wars imitation there. That was terrible. Oh my God, that deserves a little 1K tone. Oh my God, I should have bleeped that out. What do you listen on? How do you monitor what you're doing?
Okay, so I have a headphone mix coming out of the Focusrite, and I use, hang on a second, Sennheiser HD 202 headphones. Someone who was speaking at Podcast Movement 2 said that's what they use, so I got those.
Okay,
they're I think middle of the road headphones basically. I've kicked around the idea of getting monitor speakers. I'm not sure my room would tolerate it very well because I'm not sure how well. I would be interested to hear what you say about that. What do you think people should be monitoring it?
Well, so the rule of thumb or the golden rule in monitoring is basically you have to know what you're hearing. So that's the reason, like real music studios, they have certain monitors which are in a very controlled environment, so you literally know what you're hearing. Because the room you're in, if you have speakers, the room you're in does make a huge difference. And so you can wear headphones. So basically, practically speaking, if you have headphones or something where you normally, that's how you normally listen to what you're doing, that's fine because you know those headphones. You know the frequency responses and you know what it sounds like, and that's good. You just have to know what you're listening on. You have to be very familiar with it. And in the beginning, what you can do, what really helps is if you listen on your preferred method, let's say it's those headphones you have, but in the beginning, like let's say you were first starting, you don't know what that really sounds like. So you would have to maybe upload an MP3 to your phone, listen on your earbuds and say, how does that sound? Or, take it into your car, listen through your car speakers.
The car is the thing that does it. The car is the thing that does it because clearly the car, and I mean everyone listens in their car is the thing. But I make a point of listening to the show of the day we've released it in the car on my way to work to make sure that everything. Actually, it's a funny story. I caught last week. I released a special episode. Long story short, like right as I'm turning into the driveway, I catch a cursing screed that I apparently had not edited out that I thought that I had as I'm pulling into the driveway of my office. And that went out to the world. It was pretty hilarious. I was actually able to take it down and edit it and put it back up. But I think the first 185 downloads we got of that got to hear me. And I was actually cursing about my Skype connection with one of the guests, ironically enough. So it was pretty funny, actually. It was not a deal breaker. And honestly, our podcast listeners have heard worse than that, I'm sure. But I was not particularly proud of myself for actually missing one of those. I'm usually really good on that. So, but I was listening to it in my car to check the sound quality, and then heard myself have a little meltdown.
Right? Well, that's good. You got to take it out and re-upload it and replace it. Actually, I think it was maybe episode 4 of this show, the Podcast Engineering Show. My one friend who was on, Drew Smith, I think he was on episode 16 or 17, whatever. He's like, hey, did you know there's one episode where as the song's playing in the outro, it sounds like you left your mics on. I can hear you talking to the guests and everything. And I was like, oh, shoot. So I went back, and that's what happened. I didn't, cut off the track after a certain point. So I did. I cleaned it up, and in Libsyn, you can easily replace an MP3.
Oh, my gosh. Thank goodness for Libsyn, because, it took... Oh, I bet you it was a 20-minute gap where there was no file there.
You're furiously trying to edit the thing. Oh
my gosh. Yeah. Well, then I'm worried about because this was right in the beginning of the podcast, and I had edited it. But apparently I had left that part in. I don't know how it happened. So then I'm all paranoid. Did I get the rest of it? So yeah. I ended up having to listen to it later, but it was just kind of funny. And I got several comments, and most people thought it was hilarious, so I lucked out.
Oh, there you go. So just to finish up the thought on monitoring, you just have to know what you're hearing and definitely listen in different places and just be very confident of what you're hearing. I mean, I'm, for Fractal, because I'm getting so much production work for Fractal, I'm starting to work with I'm starting to start relationships with a couple different engineers, because at some point I'm going to need more help. And it's really cool that I can ask them to mix an episode and they send me the file back, and I know, because I'm monitoring the way I monitor, I know what I'm hearing, right? I can assess what they're sending me in a minute because I know what I'm hearing. I'm confident that I know what I'm hearing. The bad thing is when you're not confident and you're like, I don't know, does that sound good? Is that enough bass? Is that enough? Should I take out more low end?
No, I get it. And it's funny, is doing reps is probably, I don't know that I could do anyone else's show, but I'm pretty good at my show. I'm pretty good. I'm pretty sure of what I'm getting out of my gear and my recordings. But yeah, if you told me to do someone else's, I'd be pretty intimidated, I think.
Oh yeah, and what would be crazy is if someone gave you this new pair of earbuds and they said, "Okay, mix, EQ and compress this voice using these earbuds," and you're like, and they sounded all tinny and horrible, and you're like, you wouldn't know what you were hearing.
Sure.
You would add so much bass. You'd be like, oh, it needs more bass. And you'd pump up the bass so much. But then when you listen to it on any other speaker, it would sound so bassy and unintelligible. So you have to know what you're hearing. That's the first step of any audio engineering. You have to know what you're hearing. Because how else can you decide what it sounds like?
Sure.
So, all right. So the mastering part of it, when you do your second session in Audition and you're piecing everything together and then rendering the final MP3, are you doing any on the master bus? Are you compressing, limiting, using a multiband compressor or EQ, anything?
Not very often. Occasionally, and it depends on the few times we've recorded people live. I found myself doing that because we have a different, honestly, because it's a different sound, and sometimes it's a little too bright, that sort of thing. But I don't do much to it after we get it down to that.
Okay.
It's more about making the clips all overlap correctly and everything like that.
So have there been times when you got just a downright crappy sounding track of Skype audio, and I'm sure you have at some point. How do you fix that? How do you handle it? Here's a story. So this is for all those that think it's not that important to monitor when you're recording live or when you're recording in a room with someone. Like I was using a Zoom, an H6, and I thought it would be rude to have headphones on while I'm talking with these guys. Oh.
So I had 3 mics set up in the room, and they were actually set up pretty well. Apparently, luckily, there was plenty of crosstalk. I didn't realize that at the time. I didn't monitor because I didn't want to be the only guy in headphones or anything like that. Well, one person's mic cord went bad, 12 minutes into the show.
Oh.
And so it was just like on their track, right? I had no idea until I got back to, I'm like, what in the world am I going to do? Well, then, this is so bad. This took me a long time. I ended up having to mix that dude's track off the crosstalk of the other guy's mic.
Right.
Oh, it was, and so I had to. So I basically made a separate track off of his track, and I edited all of him out and just used the crosstalk of the other guy, and then I processed the bejesus out of it, trying to make it. And it was bad.
Right,
I won't lie to you, it was bad. It wasn't, but it was something. Right. And it was, these are 2 big shots. I wasn't going to be able to get this interview again.
Right.
I mean, it was literally in the boardroom of my first the people who are sponsoring the show for the first time. Like, I could have made a huge ass of myself here, and it ended up being okay. So Audition gives someone who's not a pro a lot of options. Let me go in, and I'm going to just open it up because it's like I forget I'll go into the there's a lot of different tweaks you can put on, EQ tweaks and that sort of thing, and their noise reduction is pretty reliable. I don't like using noise reduction in the software because I think a lot of times it makes it sound a little bit electronic to me. But and it depends. It depends on what kind of a sample you get of the background noise. If you get a really good sample, you can't even tell that you've done it.
Right.
But it's sometimes hard to do. So I have had to play around with it, but I generally don't do a lot to it. That's the worst track I ever got. It was a live track. So what effects do I go to? I typically will go and use that. It's not in noise reduction. I think it's in the multiband will allow you to do a lot of different things. So they have presets that allow you to kind of clean up a lot of stuff. Let's just say that.
Right? So, yeah, that's some of the stuff I'm going to have to check out when I finally try Audition.
It's an insane piece of software. There's so much on it that I have no idea what it even is used for. I'm sure you'll know much more about it just looking at it, but when you dig in, there's a lot of stuff in there. Yeah,
so it's almost interesting. These different softwares like Audacity and Reaper, they're a little more simple. Like, they sort of are fully functioning multitrack software, but I think Audition and Pro Tools are probably like on the next level up as far as like just full functionality for any type of music engineering and production and MIDI and everything, like stuff that podcasters would never even need to look at.
It's probably more than I need, but then there's been a few times where I was really glad it had a few of these pretty heavy duty features.
Right. So any new equipment you want to buy? What's next for you, new equipment wise? Wish list.
I mean, I'm always looking for stuff. I'd upgrade the Sapphire to the Claret version probably for no other reason than the Claret sounds. It's got some features, but I mean, it's a bunch of money for no real improvement. It's just that I'm a gearhead.
right.
I honestly haven't been looking that hard. Amazingly enough, I've not been looking that hard at podcasting gear because this has been doing very well for me. So I don't have a bunch of stuff. I'm a fan of Focusrite. They've done very well by me. I actually got an email from Focusrite last week asking me to talk to them about the difference between the Claret and the Sapphire because I'm one of the few idiots that has bought both apparently. So yeah, but I might look at doing some kind of a mobile rig because as much as the Zoom H6 is a nice recorder, but I don't know. I like being able to record it into a laptop. I really do. I'm kind of a fan of that. So I like having an audio interface instead of the direct into the recorder. And I know for most podcasters, I'm odd that way. Most people use a recorder. So I might look at putting together some kind of a mobile rig with a small audio interface.
Oh, that sounds cool. Yeah, actually, Ralph Rivera, who was on with me when I did my recap of the Q&A session, he's setting up a mobile rig, and him and I are going to have He wants my consultation on his what to buy and everything. Of course, I'm not like the mobile rig guy, but I certainly can, help him and put in my 2 cents. So we're going to have conversations about that, and we're going to record it. So perhaps a future episode of the Podcast Engineering Show will be me and Ralph sort of talking through his ideas, what he wants to do when he goes out, and what he wants in a mobile unit. I think he doesn't want to have a computer with an audio interface. He wants to have one unit that it's almost like an audio interface. I think one of them's called an F8. I forget who makes it, but it's literally 8 XLR ins. It records in the unit. Like, this one unit just does everything. You can do mix minus with it. And anyway, but look out for that in a future episode.
I definitely will, yeah.
So this has been awesome, Alan. I really appreciate you coming on the show. What's your website again, by the way?
The website would be dentalhacks.com.
Right, dentalhacks.com. And your show's available everywhere, right? iTunes and Stitcher. And all that, yeah.
Yep.
That's cool. So check out Alan's show, hear what he sounds like.
It's if you're not a dentist, you probably won't get it. But we've got a few non-dentist listeners, so you might like it. Give it a try.
Do you have any analogies between podcasting and dentistry? Not to put you on the spot.
I don't know. It's so funny because like, I'm accused by my office team of sort of the dentistry is. I mean, I like being a dentist. Being a dentist is fun and everything, but the the podcasting has like injected a whole new thing into dentistry for me. In all seriousness, so it's like honestly, podcasting just makes everything better.
Right?
It really does. Do you ever find yourself like sitting in a restaurant going, I really like coleslaw. I should do a podcast on coleslaw. That's like my whole life has sort of become like that. I look at everything with the lenses of podcasting on. So that I don't know if I guess I used to look at everything with lenses of dentistry. So now it's podcasting.
That's
so there's my
interesting.
analogy for you. Yeah.
So does anyone in your life ever say like, "Oh, would you stop talking about podcasting already?"
Yeah, oh yeah, pretty much everyone. Particularly
Really?
the gear thing. That's why I like your show, because no one wants to talk about gear with me. Even my co-host doesn't want to talk about gear with me. I'm sitting here in the basement with a whole bunch of gear that I just am jazzed about, and no one really wants to hear about it.
Right? Oh, that's so cool. Well, look, when you put together your mobile unit, we'll have to do the same thing. I'd love to talk to you about that and see how that all works, and we'll do another episode.
All right.
For sure. Well, thank you, Alan. Alan Mead. He's the host of the Dental Hacks podcast, and he's a dentist. Where are you, by the way? I never even asked
I practice in Saginaw, Michigan.
Oh, wow. Oh, winters are bad up there, huh?
Oh, yeah. We got winter here. Yep.
Yeah, because this other guy I know, he lives up there, and it's like, you see his Facebook posts in the winter. It's like ungodly.
Oh, yeah, and it's dark all the time.
Holy
yeah,
mackerel.
Pretty much, yeah.
All right, Alan, thanks again. This has been great, and thank you for listening. Again, we'll be back next week with another wonderful guest, I'm sure. I actually have a lot of personal things to share myself. I might do an episode by myself just to share a lot of my different thoughts. But until then, the website, Podcast Engineering School. Get ready for this fall. I'll be offering courses online, so wherever you are, you can be there. So thanks for listening. We'll see you next time. And of course,
Yeah, oh yeah.
sound great. See ya.
Walk away from me well, and you can't play that part so well. Why do you play it out on me now? You like to lose control well. It's quite a feeling, isn't it? Let them float and rip it down now. You tell me that you found something better. How should I respond to that? It's a lie. I don't wanna hear it. What do you want me to say? It's a lie. I don't wanna hear it. You react so angry. You change your attitude well. You say I just don't get it now. You say your eyes so far away now. Gave up on me well, so change your game and give away. Say I wouldn't understand now. You tell me that you found something better. How should I respond to that? Oh yeah, I say now, it's a lie. I don't wanna hear it. What do you want me to say? It's a lie. I don't wanna hear it. You react so angry. I want you to know you were always true. I've gone over all we've been through. Doesn't seem that long a time now. Things we did still hold that meaning. And does it mean it's still the same? You're pushing me away. The work your theories now where you're getting worked up on your now. You work your way around somehow now. Yes, it hurts me now where that you don't talk to me now. Now that these words have split apart now. You tell me that you found something better. How should I respond?